I've served the University of Adelaide in many roles, including Head of Department, Associate Dean of Science, and I was a member of the University Council in two periods for a total of 10 years. You may guess that I know the University of Adelaide extremely well and appreciate its vital intellectual and financial roles in South Australia. It's my view the proposed merger involves too many risks that will almost certainly result in financial or academic disaster or both. The University of Adelaide is not a great university, but it's very good and it could be great. However, the description of the merger to this came not the way to achieve greatness. Creating a great university is at least as difficult as building a nuclear submarine, but you don't improve the design by blowing one up and starting to rebuild it from the wreckage. Nowhere in the public discussion have I seen a serious consideration of what a university actually is and what it's for, surely the essential starting point. The phrase sui generis, loosely translated as unlike anything else, is aptly applied and it's correct. Universities are unique institutions and should not, and indeed cannot, be managed solely as businesses. To me, it's clear that the academic staff are the heart and soul of a university. It's their expertise and dedication that inspires students, the future leaders in our society, generates new knowledge, and links us to the knowledge created elsewhere. Outstanding universities recognise and respect their academic staff. For example, the Technical University of Munich is the top-rated university in Germany of 369 tertiary institutions there, with extremely strong ties to German industries such as BMW. Its council consists of the 10 members of the Senate, 7 are leading academics at TUM, representing active research fields, and there are 3 other employee and student representatives. And there are 10 external members, including presidents of research organisations such as Max Planck and Helmholtz. And there are renowned academics from other universities as well as industry representatives. The president's chosen by the council from the professors at the university. In comparison with that, the composition of the council at the University of Adelaide and that proposed for Adelaide University, where there are just 2 academics, one being the chair of academic board, is totally inadequate. When it's stated that the University of Adelaide agreed to merge, it must be remembered that it is this council, with its inadequate structure, that made the decision against the will of the academic staff. The need for council to be kept aware of academic reality, independent of management perspective, was made very clear in the recent O'Connor review, commissioned by the Chancellor of the University of Adelaide, at least partially in response to concerns I had addressed to her. In December 2021, it recommended Academic Board as a forum for collegial discussion of key academic issues for the university and the sector. I'm currently one of the 6 professors elected last year as members of Academic Board in response to that report. In February of this year, I requested that the merger proposal be discussed in detail in that forum, in order that council might receive at least some genuine academic advice. It never made the agenda. As a result, the council, which is bereft of experienced academics, did not receive the advice which might have left it better informed. So what are the risks posed by the proposed merger? Firstly, the 2 institutions are like chalk and cheese. The ethos of the staff is by and large very different, with the importance of world-class research far less valued at UniSA. Promotion criteria are consequently different, yet it's proposed that merging these 2 very different cultures will happen seamlessly in just 2 years. It's not just amongst the academic staff that the culture diverges dramatically. As reported by the chair of the NTU at the University of Adelaide, she was astonished to find in a recent meeting with administrators at UniSA that they could not understand why academics would need to be involved in planning new course structures at Adelaide University. Yet it's proposed that the more than 1,500 professional staff at each of these 2 very different institutions will become one happy family in 2 years' time. The student body is very different, as students are accepted with an ATAR as low as 50 at UniSA and around 80 at the University of Adelaide. The two institutions serve very different groups of students, both important, but nevertheless very different. No one in their right mind would put students with such different backgrounds in the same classroom. This will render the naive suggestion of economies of scale difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. Reports from mergers elsewhere confirm the belief amongst academics at the University of Adelaide, with whom I've discussed the issues, that at department and discipline level, where the real work of the university is carried out, there will be chaos for 5 to 10 years after the merger. This is supported by experience at Manchester, where the disparity in ranking was not so large. That is not an environment conducive to world-leading research, hence it's not conducive to higher rankings. Let me turn to the financial issues. The university's submissions are extremely vague on detail, but it's clear that more than $600 million of university funds, which is planned to be spent on the merger implementation, gets them to the very bottom of the barrel. There is no extra money available. Where is the contingency? As stated in my submission, I was a member of council at the university during the 1990s. Following the massive changes forced upon the tertiary education system by Dawkins, the sector needed entirely new IT systems. The cost at the University of Adelaide blew out by the order of $100 million over budget, and the story was similar across the country. It's over 25 years later, and the merged university will require systems more than 3 times larger than those needed in the 90s. It's therefore quite conceivable that the IT costs could blow out by $500,000 and potentially $500 million, and potentially much more. Apart from IT, the costs of the consolidation of research and teaching activities across multiple campuses could be extremely high. Until it's decided how the new institution will be structured, including where key research activities will be located, those costs cannot be realistically calculated. To move major scientific and engineering infrastructure is extremely expensive. Any acceptable business plan would include a detailed explanation of how to deal with contingencies like this. However, it's obvious that there is simply no money in the combined institutions to deal with such a scenario. It would mean massive staff cuts, with the corresponding destruction of morale. I note that 4 years after the much smaller merger in Manchester, cost overruns led to layoffs of 400 staff. It's unclear how the growth in student numbers at the merged university was derived, and therefore how reliable those figures are. Birth statistics show that there will be some growth in university-age students in South Australia, but no one can know in 10 years' time the percentage who will choose to study at Adelaide University, or indeed whether they might prefer the more stable Flinders University, presumably still in its not blown up state. Overseas student numbers are totally linked to ranking, and no one can know how the new university will be ranked in 10 years, especially if a cost blowout leads to dramatic staff cuts. What is clear is that in 2034, where KPIs such as large increases in student numbers and research income are promised, few, if any, of the leading proponents of the merger, either within the universities or in government, are likely to be there to suffer the consequences of failure. But the state will be. It would have been much more informative if there had been a realistic analysis of the situation without a merger, given a more rational and productive use of funds earmarked to pay for it. If the sum of more than $1 billion, including the government contribution, proposed to pay for this merger, were instead to be spent wisely to boost research and enhance teaching in critical areas at the existing institutions, it would be guaranteed to raise the ranking of the existing universities and to attract more students. Thank you.
Questions from members? For morale, rather, I should say, I see the Honourable Ron Sims.
Thanks very much for coming along to speak to us today. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on some of the comments you made regarding culture and the two different cultures of University of Adelaide and University of South Australia in terms of some of the challenges that you see around the merger.
Yeah. There's a mixture of staff at both institutions, but university rankings are very much determined by research outcomes, by grants, by major awards, and so on, by publications, citations. These things count, and overseas students are extremely strongly influenced by those. That's why there are twice as many overseas students at Adelaide as at UniSA. There are roughly 900 academic staff who are not on research contracts at the University of Adelaide. It's quite a small number, really, for 26,000 students. Of those, something like 200 are teaching only, and 600 plus are teaching and research. So the research activity that they carry on is carried over into their teaching, and as I said, at least at times inspires their students. I can't claim that everyone's inspiring, but at times inspires the students. The number of outstanding academics you've heard from other people is probably in the 100 to 200 range, probably around 200. At UniSA, it's nothing like that number. Of course, there are some good people there. And when it's appropriate, there is collaboration in those areas between the two universities. Medicine is an outstanding example where there's collaboration. But the percentage of staff one more thing. To be an outstanding researcher, it's not something you do in your spare time. It's not something you do when you're not teaching. When there's a little time left over for teaching. It's every day and night and weekend and every hour, I exaggerate only slightly, when you're thinking about the problems, trying to solve them, thinking about how to resolve the problems your graduate students have. And that's a part of the culture that really, on the whole, does not exist at UniSA. And without it, you don't get the high rankings and the prestige that attracts first-class international students and numbers of international students.
Are you concerned about the decline then in potential rankings? I mean, we have heard evidence of this committee that I think it was Mr. Schott told the committee that he expected there would be a reduction in rankings initially, but that wouldn't have an impact necessarily on recruitment of international students. Is that your view?
I think, given, as I said, there will be considerable disruption for 5 to 10 years at the level of department and discipline. And that's not an atmosphere conducive to research. Also, we don't know where various research groups were located. In physics, we managed to get through an endowment an outstanding researcher. It's taken more than 2 years for the university to outfit his labs. So he's been sitting there twiddling his thumbs for over 2 years while the university tries to fund the funds and get his labs built. If he then has to move those labs in a couple of years' time, for example, because we decide that that sort of research will be at UniSA, at the campus north of the city at Mawson Lakes, he's not going to stay. He'll put up with it once, but not twice. And that's just one example.
And just finally, Professor, the question of governance of the new institution. I think the draft bill has the structure of the new university being pretty well the same in terms of makeup of university councils. Do you have a view on that?
Well, I thought I put that fairly forcefully. I think the current council is totally in it. The structure, of course, the members do their best, but the current council is not the appropriate body to manage a university. A few years ago, we had a madness where somehow business got its foot in the door and decided that you couldn't have a working council with more than a dozen people. Well, TUM is the best university in Germany. It has some of the best industry collaboration in the world. They have 20 people, including 10 from within the university, and leading academics from other universities. And their president is elected from the academic staff. And yet they're outstanding. It's just garbage. You have to have academics on the governing board. Who would have a council for a mine without people who had experience in the mining industry.
Professor, I think there might be a supplementary
Can I
question
just
to
ask
my
a
right.
follow-up to that question, please? Appreciate you're very passionate and you've always got a lot of information about that, but you're also against the merger. Wouldn't you think the opportunity to make change would be when there is a complete view of the structure rather than hoping what's been there for a long time is going to change and be better?
Well, Parliament had no trouble changing the structure of council a decade ago. It went through very quickly.
But that's led to your frustration now.
Yes, because the wrong decision was made with poor advice.
Okay. And
But you're completely right. If, in the worst case, we do form Adelaide University, the proposed council is exactly the same as the structure of the University of Adelaide, of the current University of Adelaide. It's about a dozen people and one academic. That's not right.
yeah, but I guess you mentioned one of the UniSA professors that talked, and he saw this as an opportunity to actually get in and change it from the ground up to make it better, because he seemed to have similar frustrations, I guess, to what you had, and he saw it as an opportunity rather than a problem.
I'm not sure that he was focused on the council. I think he was intent on blowing the entire institution up. And try to please remember my image of a blown-up nuclear submarine and trying to put it back together.
He might have
Not the way to do it.
No, he may have used, some creative language, I guess, to describe it. But I think, and he wasn't the only professor from the universities to describe this as an opportunity rather than a threat. And I guess there are divergent opinions across academia, because we've had other professors come in and see it as a real opportunity. And you mentioned medicine, that was one where they saw barriers to collaboration between the universities at the moment, which they would see go away in a new university. So there are divergent opinions.
Of course, we're human beings, and given any two people, there'll be divergent opinions. Some are right and some are wrong. It's completely conceivable that in 10 years, with the expenditure of $1 billion, plus whatever blowouts there are, which are highly likely, we may have a good functioning university with somewhat more students. It's possible. However, given $1 billion spending in the next few years, there are no risks about establishing really outstanding universities, about improving the standing of the current universities dramatically.
We might take the Honourable Rob Sims to finish that line of questioning and then...
Thanks very much, Chair. Just a final question for you around governance. I think also it was some evidence from Mr. Schott, who appeared before this committee, where he talked about the potential for the new university to look at curbing the salaries of vice-chancellors. Is that something that you're supportive of?
Look, I know Chris well. I sat next to him for some of the time that he was on council. In fact, I was one of the people who suggested him. I think as far as the merger goes, he's completely incorrect. In assessing vice-chancellors' salaries, that's not for me. On the other hand, I will say that at the Technical University in Munich, the professor elected to be president doesn't get paid $1 million a year. It's not necessary. There are outstanding people within the university who would do the job.
Thank you.
Honourable John Gardner.
Thank you. I have questions in a couple of different areas. And you referenced in your comments, one of the key propositions that's been argued in favour of the merger is the capacity for more international students to come to South Australia, that being a positive for the state, potentially for the new university, but certainly in terms of both direct and indirect benefit for the state. So let's assume that the committee thinks that more international students would be a good thing. One of the propositions that I'm interested in testing your view on is that Adelaide University has about as many international students as it has social licence for. If you get above a certain proportion in the university, then you potentially put at risk the teaching. And I think you said in your comments that Adelaide University has nearly twice as many international students as UniSA. There's also the draw of the higher ranking university. So the logical consequence of that is put to us that therefore if you have the merge, you'll be able to get more international students because the overall proportion of international students in the merged university will be lower than is currently the case at Adelaide University. But the draw, even if Adelaide University's ranking were to drop a little, it'll still be a lot higher than University of South Australia. So the draw of the new university would be higher than the University of South Australia's. And therefore the argument flows, you get more international students, and that would be a good thing. That's a paraphrased summary of one of the stronger arguments in favour. What's your international students, in terms of your understanding of international students in the areas in which you've worked, do you see any problems with that, or do you think that that is the upside as opposed to the risks that you identify?
I think the argument draws a very long bow. Certainly international students are an enormous benefit to the university. I'm not aware of significant tensions within the student group. We are at somewhat of a demographic minimum in terms of number of local South Australian university age students, and that will grow again over the 10 years. That means that the number of local students will grow at the current University of Adelaide if it's not destroyed, just as it might, as it would be expected to grow at Adelaide University. But key to attracting those, so first of all, I don't see a problem with attracting more international students now or over the next few years as local student numbers grow, and I'm not aware of tensions on campus between overseas. How do you tell? There are many people of Asian background who were born in Australia. Is that what you're referring to?
No. I think it's been put that if a university is seen to have a majority of students being international students, then the focus is on servicing their needs rather than the teaching needs of local students, which is also part of what the university is responsible for. I think that's the paraphrase of how it's been put to us, rather than there being tensions between different groups.
I think all the good academics at the university teach to the students they have, and so there's a mixture.
So I guess the counterfactual then would be, is it your argument that we can achieve a growth in international student numbers with the two institutions remaining separate if Adelaide University continues to seek to grow its international student numbers, then it's capable of doing so?
Absolutely, and that will be made more likely if its ranking goes up. And as I pointed out, investing $1 billion, not all of it, of course, into the University of Adelaide, but investing that sort of sum over the next decade would be guaranteed to raise the ranking and make it more attractive to international students. On the other hand, the cultural and financial risks of merging the two institutions, forming this new institution, are almost certainly going to lower rankings for some time, maybe permanently. And why would you take that risk when you have a guaranteed path to improve the situation?
Further questions? Honourable Jingley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, Professor, for your very comprehensive opening statement. May the committee know whether you made a formal representation of your concerns that you share with us today? Did you make a formal representation to the council, and have you received a formal response, if that's the case?
Sorry. I wrote a letter very similar to my submission to this body, to the Chancellor. I received a very short email saying it had been filed.
Further questions?
Sorry, just further questions, Chair.
Sorry, I must say, as a former member of council, someone who's talked to her about university matters quite a bit, I found that just a little bit disturbing, but I'm only an academic, so I'm in a position to be disturbed.
Thank you. And since you received that email, have you then further, advocate or raise your concern in another way?
There's no opportunity to do that. The staff forums that were held were basically public relations exercises with no place for serious discussion. And as I said, my attempt to get it onto the agenda of academic board, which would not be perfect because there are very few academics, but still more than there were a year ago. Most of the people are administrative academics who respond to administrators above them who eventually respond to the Vice-Chancellor. So it's difficult to get an independent view, but at least there would have been some. But that opportunity was not taken.
Just further supplementary, Chair. Today you passionately, spoke and represent yourself, but do you also feel that how many percentage of the academics of the university you are also representing today and act as the voice for them? Just a sort of anecdote representation. What percentage would that be?
Well, in science, which is part of the Faculty of Science and Engineering and Technology, I know less people in engineering, but I know no one on the academic staff who is in favour of this. I've met nobody. I don't survey the university staff. The union did. I'm not a union member, but nevertheless, I find the union president very refreshing, very intelligent, and sensible. And their survey found that 95% of the academic staff were opposed. Sorry, I might have misspoke. I'm not sure they surveyed all staff, or I think it was probably all staff since they represent all staff, but 95% were opposed.
Thank you.
No, Florrie.
Professor, thank you for coming today. You talked previously about your concerns about the different culture that exists amongst academic staff at the two universities, and your concerns about how those two different cultures might try and mesh together. You did also mention briefly your concerns about the, for want of a better term, quality of students from the two different universities and how they might mesh together.
The way I refer to it is different backgrounds. Those backgrounds may be differences in ability. They may be lesser opportunities at the schools that they attended, but nevertheless, an ATAR of 50 is very low. And you simply cannot teach the same material in the same way to those students. I presume, I don't know, but I presume that UniSA is very good at dealing with those students and teaching them where they are. But you won't get any economies of scale by putting those students in a class just because the subject is the same with students who've had a much better preparation and or higher ability.
So is it your position that those students who might have the lower ATARs would be better served by having an alternative university that they can attend rather than an elite university like University of Adelaide?
I think that UniSA does that very well, and if some of the money that is proposed to be devoted to this merger were used to improving the teaching to that lower ATAR group of students, that would be a plus for the state as well.
Thank you.
Or Reggie Martin.
Just a couple of questions from your opening statement around, you talked about the finances around the university and your concerns about the risk there. I think you mentioned that there's no contingency, but the information that we've been provided says there's a 10% built-in contingency, and plus the budget has over $300 million cash on hand from their projections. Don't you think that should be enough to help cover things, as well as their ongoing commitments to capital expenditure and IT costs of over $100 million for both of those?
You honestly think that with a university with a staff of close to 7,000 staff, $300 million is a sufficient reserve?
That seems fairly substantial, and that's not including the endowments that both universities have.
Sorry?
And that's not including the endowments that the
Well,
universities
you can't
have.
touch the endowment.
No, that's right.
At least if you do, you'll never get any more donations.
So Or on that regard, but you've also thrown out some numbers about how much you think it could cost. Where are you basing your figures on? So the university has showed us how they've come up with their figures. How are you coming up with your figures?
Yeah. Well, one is simply inflation based on the experience in the 90s with an IT system. But the oft-quoted example is Manchester. Over 10 years from the merger to when things settled down, that's cost £1.3 billion. And that was a merger of a larger institution with an institution with 6,000 staff, where the staff at both places agreed that it was a good idea. So a much less challenging merger cost £1.3 billion up until 2013. So apply some inflation to that, and you're well over $2 billion. Well over $2 billion, probably nearer to 3 with inflation for the cost experienced at Manchester with a much simpler merger. And on the way, they had to fire 400 staff in the 4th year, which I'm sure took a long time sorry, that's not very grammatic, and I'm sure it took a long time for the morale within the institution to improve following that.
So this $1.3 billion, 1.3 billion pounds, sorry, is that you suggesting that's an overspend, or that was part of the original?
That was
budget,
the cost.
and that doesn't include.
That's the merger cost, not the operating.
But that's on top of the normal costs of
Yes,
operating the
on top of the
university.
normal cost.
Just a question of clarification, Professor, just to go back to the point you made before around different backgrounds or academic capacity of students within the two institutions. Wouldn't it be the case, though, that if you had, let's say, students who have got an ATAR entry score of 50, they're going to be in a particular course that has an entry requirement at that level, and then a student that has an ATAR of, say, 80 is going to be in a course that has an entry requirement of that level. So how would the institution not be able to manage that?
No, of course it could manage it. The question is, where are the increases in efficiency that are going to free up money?
Okay, I see.
There are none.
So what you're saying that it would be appealing to a much broader catchment. I mean, I just would have thought that any institution has a varying degrees of entry based on TR or ATAR performance, and it would depend on the individual course. So is your concern that then they're going to be expanding the course offering potentially, and there's no efficiencies?
Well, if you can't combine some courses into bigger groups, then you're not increasing the efficiency. And so there are no savings. You've got the same number of people teaching the same number of courses. The other issue is whether in 10 years one will still have people with that ATAR coming into university, as we realise that the vocational education sector is increasingly important and needs to be boosted, and it may well be that some of those students see their future in probably higher paying jobs in the vocational sector than through university study.
Reggie Martin.
One more, sorry. It'd be remiss not to ask a question about your particular field of expertise and where this state is heading, I guess, with the AUKUS agreement. If you're in the nuclear field and we're going to have nuclear submarines, is the current structure of all the university sector in South Australia currently able to satisfy the demand for what's going to be required of a submarine, AUKUS nuclear submarine?
Yes, I think we can. It could use obviously there are places that there can be improvement. We have experts in nuclear engineering. I've taught graduate courses in nuclear physics in Canada when I was there. I don't teach much nuclear physics here at the moment. It tends to be particle physics, but I'm a nuclear physicist, but I don't work in reactors. I work in the quark structure of matter. But I have connections with all the major nuclear labs in the world, but particularly in the Asian region. One of the sad things I thought about the the proposal with which I didn't have a great deal of sympathy of turning South Australia into a radioactive waste dump a few years ago. I thought it was a pity that if we were going to think about nuclear power, that we were not investing in transmutation of nuclear waste, where China is putting a lot of money and Europe a little, where you can take nuclear waste and convert it by bombarding it with high energy particles to waste that instead of lasting 100,000 years will last 50. That, for me, is the future of dealing with the radioactive waste problem from nuclear reactors. But yes, so we don't have a lot of nuclear physics. In fact, we have about 10% of the people working in nuclear physics in Australia that Canada has. Academics working in nuclear physics that there is in Canada. And Canada's not proposing to build nuclear submarines. So we need a boost, but we can do that with a little bit of thought.
Thank you.
But the question is, thank the witness for correcting grammar along the way. I thought that was outstanding. Thank you. I wish everyone would.
For which you can thank my fourth year high school English teacher, who I hated for making me write an essay every weekend. Only later did I realise the poor sod marked them every weekend too.
God bless him.
Very well. Thank you, Professor, for your assistance today. It's appreciated.